We're very fortunate to have Lyd Hawkins with us tonight. Lyd is the granddaughter of Charles Chapman, former president of BCMC. She's doing a book launch and at the same time sharing an important piece of history of BCMC. In August 1909, 4 members of the BCMC set out to explore and climb around Loch Lomond, the headwaters of the Seymour Creek. There will be a Q&A after the presentation, so please send your questions to chat and I'll make sure that I'll go through the list of questions. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Lyd.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. And thanks to the BC Mountaineering Club for inviting me to this social and for the opportunity to share this story. I'm going to tell you about a 2-week trek to the headwaters of the Seymour Creek, taken by 4 early members of the BCMC in the summer of 1909. Years ago, I found this journal in a family bookcase. And when I read it, I realized the journal went together with some photos from a family album. Both of these belong to my grandfather, Charles Chapman. Wow, I can put these together, I thought. This will be easy. Ha! "20 years later, I have this little book. In the summer of 1909, 4 members of BCMC began a trip to the headwaters of the Seymour Creek. Their goal was to climb, survey and map, paint and photograph, and to enjoy 2 weeks off work. This is the story of those 2 weeks. This is Fred Perry, a founding member of the club. He had been up there before. He was a master tailor and an early ecologist. Maybe you can see the line leading from his hand to the shutter release of the camera. Fred had hoboed around Eastern Canada and New England as an itinerant tailor and moved to Vancouver in 1905. He was often the cook on trips and was known to be an excellent mouse catcher at the club shacks. Here is the great hunter, tongue firmly planted in cheek, showing off his catch. Look at all those weapons. This is Billy Gray, another founding member. He had also been up there before. He's only 19 in this picture. He worked as a cigar maker's apprentice and had an interest in geology. On this trip, he carried a tripod and plane table for surveying. You can see the plane table peeking out from behind him. Charles MacDonald, referred to in the journal as Old Mac because he was 35 years old. He was a member of the club for just a few years. Charles had already traveled the world, working on ships and painting the sights he saw. This one is of the Red Shack, the first BCMC cabin on grouse. This treasure is on the wall behind me. Much of his other work is collected at the Charles MacDonald Concrete House in Nova Scotia. Charles Chapman, or Chappie, is the writer of the journal and main photographer on the trip. Charles worked as a printer. It was his firm, Chapman and Warwick, that printed the Mountaineer for decades. He was club president from 1914 to 1919. The 4 men headed out July 24th with 50-pound packs and a pie, given by a lady friend. Chappie writes, "One of our lady friends kindly presented us with a pie as we were leaving. Perry ungallantly refused to accept it, but Billy brought it along, and a very awkward present it proved, for it was necessary to carry it in the hand, and the plate was heavier than 4 plates put together. I might say at one stage of the journey, I exchanged the gun for the pie, but after carrying it for about a mile, I was very pleased to hand the pie back to Mac and take the gun again, and the gun weighed 7 pounds. They took the ferry across Burrard Inlet, then the electric rail car to the terminus at the top of Grand Boulevard in North Vancouver. The journal again. In dress, we were several degrees removed from drawing room attire. The oldest coat we possessed, an old shirt, brown overalls, puttees, and a pair of strong hobnail boots. Billy's hat appeared to have been recently riddled with a charge of birdshot. Frank Smith notes in an article in the Mountaineer 50th anniversary book. To modern mountaineers, the appearance of a climber 50 years ago, this is now 112 years ago, would have caused amazement, if not mirth. Everyone wore their oldest clothes, and a few trips reduced them to rags. The appearance of the lady climbers was even more hideous than that of the men. She was forced by the laws of polite society to wear a skirt reaching to her heels. I think their skirts were stashed in the bushes at the start of the trip. Smith continues, the ferry company forbade any lady to board the ferry attired in bloomers, and on one occasion an unfortunate bloomer girl had to send word across and have some relative come over with a skirt to enable her to get home. They hiked up Lynn Valley Road to Rice Lake, then followed the skid road to this, oh my goodness, sorry, these things happen. They followed the skid road to the Seymour Creek waterworks. I guess this is, sorry, I guess this is all underwater now. They took the old Burrard Lillooet cattle trail. Even then, it was in pretty rough shape. Blazed 35 years previously, it had been used only once for a cattle drive, with rather disastrous consequences. Many cattle died. One cow apparently committed suicide, looking over a cliff and then throwing herself off it. After that, prospectors, packers, trappers used the trail, and the occasional hiker. It was a wet summer with lots of mist and rain and mosquitoes. Sometimes they camped in the open, sometimes in shacks along the trail. On the third day, they met the miners of Jungletown. From the journal. This place was a depot for some of their supplies, and 2 of the miners conceived the idea of naming it. Before we left Jungletown, we noticed one miner, a German, making strenuous but unavailing efforts to lift his pack from a tree stump. The others seemed to think it was a huge joke, especially when the victim discovered that his pack was nailed down. The last leg of the climb sounds a bit grim. Chappie writes, a heavy fog hung around us. It was impossible to see more than a few yards. The bushes and undergrowth were dripping with moisture. We were wet through, hungry and exhausted, and the prospect of another 100 feet to climb was appalling. Billy insisted on completing the journey that night. How we managed that last long pull is hard to describe. A heartbreaking, bone-aching, wearying tramp it was. Billy maintained his position in the van and appeared to be of iron mold. The rest of us dragged our leaden limbs up the steep slope. Perry encouraged us by continually repeating how short a distance it was until he lost every spark of vitality and followed the trail in spiritless silence. Mac was the reincarnation of a stoic and bore his burdens with fortitude. At last, a yell from Billy came echoing through the fog and announced we had arrived. What a relief to get rid of the loads we had carried during the past 3 days and a half. What a satisfaction to know we need not shoulder them again the next morning. The next day, they explored the divide between the Stiwamus and Seymour watersheds, and the land between Loch Lomond Head, now Ben Lomond, and the Sawtooth Range. I think this map was done by Billy Gray. You can see where their camp is down here. From the journal again. The Lillooet Trail follows the south and west shore of the lake. The lake opens into a fair-sized bay, which was covered with snow and ice. We threaded our way till we reached the divide where the waters part. A gentle slope of snow and heather, intersected by many rippling brooks and winding watercourses, led us to another lake which forms the source of the Britannia Creek. Scattered among the straggling bushes were many bright grassy patches with beautiful pools of pure, clean water and buttercups and daisies springing all around. We followed the valley until we reached a part where it began to drop rapidly. And here we had a splendid view of the peaks of the Sawtooth Range. The 2 highest peaks had been christened the Sisters by Billy the previous year. On the way back to camp, we saw a wild duck with 3 young ones swimming in the lower lake. After a little thought, we concluded that the young ones were old enough to look after themselves, and roast duck appeared appetizing. Mac opened fire with ball cartridges, but after 5 shots, during which the duck seemed to be the center of a maelstrom, he handed the rifle to Perry, who with 2 more shots completed the fusillade, and the bird still lived. This is their camp. You can see a line again from Chappie's hand under the table to the direction of the camera, to the camera's shutter release. That's Billy peering bleary-eyed from the tent. And there's Charles McDonald showing Perry one of his paintings. The next day, they climbed Loch Lomond Head. Chappie writes, little lakes of lovely emerald hue nestled in a valley at the foot of a long snow slope from the head. At a short distance rose the battered crags of the Sawtooth Range, seemingly connected with Loch Lomond by snowy ridges. We decided to make an attempt on the Sisters by this route as soon as the weather was favorable. And we took our bearings for the return trip by way of Cathedral Mountain, relying chiefly on Billy's hunch of location. They met with adverse weather conditions, but during their stay at the lake, made an attempt on the Sawtooth Range. Clouds and rain turned them back, and they barely reached the base of the peaks. They climbed Mount Sheer, though, and Dunsinane Ridge east of the lake, which I believe is now called Bagpipe Peak. On August 5th, they started the return trip. There was no journal existing of the return trip, sadly. Perhaps Chappie was too exhausted to keep notes. With a great deal of help from BCMC members Michael Feller, Glenn Woodsworth, David Crerar, and Anders Orum. Hours and hours at the North Vancouver Archives looking through the BCMC archives, poring over topographical maps, Google Earth, etc. I came to understand that they followed the Burrard-Lillooet trails south to around Jungletown. And then they climbed up some peaks to the west of Seymour Creek and proceeded downward along the skyline. Here's Billy in the lead, then Perry, Charles McDonald, and lastly, Chappie Chapman. This part of the trip took 2 days. Then they crossed the summit of Cathedral Mountain, and connected in with trails leading to Lind Creek, and they ran for the last streetcar of the day to town. This rugged route has never since been followed, and it speaks well for the robust character of these early mountaineers that they should attempt it on a return trip from a strenuous holiday. Well, that's the story of their 2-week adventure in Loch Lomond area in 1909. There's more to the story and more wonderful pictures in the book. Thank you for your kind appreciation and attention. I'll send the BCMC library a few copies of this book, and there will be a few copies in the North Van archives also. If you would like to buy a copy, please email me. It's $25. Thank you very much.
Wow, excellent. Thank you so much, Lyd. It's such precious history.
Thank you.
Really, thank you for putting all the information in a book, I guess, for the next generation and next generation of BCMC members to learn and to cherish. I guess we'll open it up to the participants. Any questions for Lyd? Please send it through chat, so I guess so that people can see your questions, and we'll make sure that all your questions will be answered. How long did it take you to put all the information together leading to the publication?
Well, I did a book before, just but I came back to it. So this version of the book, I guess, it took me about 6 months.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. We have a question from Philip Gibbs. This may be more general, but when was the dam built? Do you know, or any members here know about that?
Sorry, I didn't.
There's a question from Philip.
Yes.
When was the dam built?
Oh, there were several dams. There was one, I believe, around 1912, and then there was another one in the 20s, and then another one in the 60s.
Mm-hmm. A question from Dave Woodsworth. That's an amazing story. Thanks. Did they return the pie plate, or is it still in the wilderness waiting to be found?
Yes, I didn't hear you really. Sorry.
Did they return the pie plate?
Oh,
or is it still in the wilderness waiting to be found?
I don't know, but they did find it useful despite its annoyance at the beginning. They used it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Sue and Terry, have you hiked any of the routes at all?
No. I did contact Metro Vancouver regarding the trail up there because, of course, it's closed. And they said they thought there were some remnants up around Loch Lomond.
Okay. And from JN, I love that it feels like the more that changes, the more that stays the same. We're doing nearly the same trips to the same regions 120 years down the road. Is there more detailed mapping in the book?
Yes, there's more maps and lots more funny little stories. And
okay, so there's enough information for a do-over trip 120 years on.
oh, I don't know about that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Alexa, is the Sawtooth Range Sky Pilo and Lech?
Yes, it's the Sky Pilot, I believe. It's Sky
Pilot,
Pilot,
okay.
Co-Pilot, and Ledge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, Glenn would know.
Yeah, I'm gonna break protocol here because I cannot type on this crappy keyboard, so I'm gonna speak, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, the names Skypilot and Ledge are what the things are called now. I love the Sawtooth name. That's very descriptive when you're looking at it from Strawn and the Lions and Crown and things like that. But there was a Skypilot mineral claim in the area, and I think that's where the thing comes from. And Skypilot, of course, was a term used around the turn of the century for basically a preacher or a minister or a man of God, so to speak. Ledge is a descriptive name for the ledge on the thing, which provides an easy way up it.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I think Sue and Terry had a question, but they sent it to me directly. How did they find the route back then?
Well, Billy and Perry had been up there the year before. And I think it was a well-traveled route. There were a lot of people trekking up and down there, prospecting, and there was already copper mining going on around Utopia Lake.
Mm-hmm.
which was that picture I showed. It said Vulcan's Valley.
A question from Gordon. What streetcar did they catch? North Vancouver had streetcars?
What, sorry?
Streetcar.
Yes.
What streetcar did they catch?
Well, I don't know what it was called. But it went from the Lonsdale Pier, I think along around 3rd, and then it went up Grand Boulevard. Now, you know, I see Jennifer Clay has signed in. Jennifer is involved in the North Shore Historical Society, and I think she knows about the electric car line in North Van quite well.
And actually, Jennifer just sent through chat that North Van had a series of 3 streetcars terminating at Capilano, Lynn Valley, and Upper Lonsdale.
Right. Yeah. The Lynn Valley part of it was extended after this trip that these 4 took. From north, the Grand Boulevard was the terminus when they did their trip, and then it was extended the later in that year to Lynn Valley.
Anything else you want to add, Jennifer?
Oh, I could add a whole bunch more, but probably not relevant.
Okay. A question from Michael is for Lyd or Glenn. Where was the mine whose camp the party found? Do you or Glenn know?
There's a series of, not mines, but a series of what we call prospects, which is things that prospectors find, prospective mines, if you will, but mines which never really happened. There are quite a few of those, some around Loch Lomond, some up in Furry Creek country towards the head, and of course a whole host of things up around Mountain Lake, and Britannia Creek itself was heavily staked up to about the base of the Sawteeth Peaks there. So the one I think they were at might have been a jungle camp, I think, if I remember it from our conversation, might have been one of the ones in the Upper Seymour drainage. But I can't remember, that was a year ago.
Thank you, Glenn. Another question from Gordon. Kai asks, how many summits did they complete?
That's my grandson. They
Oh.
Made 3 summits. Loch Lomond Head and the Sawteeth, and those were first ascents, and then they climbed Cathedral Mountain, but that was the second ascent.
Said Kai is your grandson,
Kai is
so,
my
which means Charles is his great-great-grandfather.
Yes.
Wow. Hi, Kai. Okay, any other questions?
If I, just a bit of BCMC history, if I could.
Please.
Billy Gray was one of the very earliest of the club presidents, maybe the third president or something like that. And then he was killed. He and another geologist were killed in the Kootenays. They drowned in the Kootenay River in 1914, 1915, something like that.
1917.
1917, okay. And Chappie was a member of the club all his life until he died in 1960. And he was an honorary president of the club from about 1950, 52 until his death, something like that. And Fred Perry was a member and an honorary member all his life too. So a very distinguished group you had there.
Yes, a very valuable presentation. I'm glad we have it recorded. So there will be other members who missed the session today that can watch the recording. Any other questions before we wrap up? Did Chappie tell the stories when you were a girl? From Alice.
You know, he died when I was 8, so I didn't know him very well, but I have wonderful memories of him making daisy chains for my hair and at Christmas and that sort of thing. He always wore a 3-piece suit when he came over to the family home for dinner, and he had a gold watch chain that went through his vest. So he was very dapper.
Thank you. Actually, we have a couple more questions from Alexa. Any idea on the food supplies? What sort of food they brought with them?
They had, my grandfather left the shopping list in the book, in the journal. So yes, there's a list in the book of all the things they took, molasses and oats, and I'm sorry, I can't seem to find it right now, but It's quite entertaining. Lots and lots of food. Here it is.
I guess 50 pounds each that they were carrying.
8 pounds of butter, 25 pounds of flour, 4 pounds of rolled oats, etc., etc. 5 pounds of salt pork, 5 cans of milk, lots of dried eggs.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. It was
Really appreciate it, Liz.
a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Very
Mhm.
grateful for the opportunity.
No, it's an opportunity that we won't want to miss.
Thank you.